Shut up and sit down.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You still have distrust there.
We all come from very different places.
Man, we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
We deserve better.
People have to have the information in front of them.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
There you go. Like, just promote people who are doing something. Volunteer to work with people who you like. And
take an issue that's important to you and do something.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only
fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
Exactly a year since we spoke last.
Yeah. I don't know if we've actually spoken since I had you on the show last time. I think we had one conversation about For All after that, but that's about it.
I saw that you had Justin on a couple months after you had me on, so that's always good. Mm-hmm. It's been an interesting project to see grow over the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah. I would love to talk about For All tonight, but I'm gonna try to keep myself on Students for Liberty because
absolutely
both organizations are really awesome, and it's cool that you get to be a part of both of them. So I'm gonna start at the origin story. How did you first get involved with Students for Liberty?
Oh, that's a great question. So I don't know where you were during the Ron Paul movement. I think every time I talk to like anyone in the libertarian movement, somehow Ron Paul comes up. It's like every time. But for me, in 2012 was the first year that I could vote. So I was 18 years old and like trying to figure out what my political views were. And I found Ron Paul's presidential campaign. He kind of introduced me to the ideas of libertarianism at the time. And like many other people in the movement, I kind of just kind of immersed myself in that world, trying to learn as much as I could. And one of the things I wanted to do in college as a recent freshman was join a student group. So I found after the election, it was 2013, a guy by the name of David Hughes, who you may or may not know. He lived in East Tennessee at the time, and he was a local coordinator for Students for Liberty. And he reached out to me and said, hey, there's this conference going on in Washington, D.C., and we're organizing a carpool. I think you might be interested in joining. So come meet up with me in Oak Ridge. I'll tell you about it, and we'll, go to this conference. And so I think it was 2013, I drove out, met the guy. We talked about it. He seemed interesting enough. Seemed like a really chill dude. And we decided we were going to do it. We got the carpool going. About a week later, we drove to the International Students for Liberty Conference, which was huge. I think there was over 1,000 people there. And it was it was just a crazy experience for me. Like I showed up there, and I don't know if you've been to many Students for Liberty conferences, but in the early 2010s, I showed up and there were thousands of people from all of these different places around the world, from Africa and Europe and South America, all passionate about libertarian ideas, libertarian values, and really smart, well-dressed people, really cool people. And so it was like an immediate thing. Like, it was just awesome. I met Justin Amash at that conference in 2013. And so that was just like the thing. It triggered me to join the LC program 10 years ago now. and I became a coordinator I think at the time it was at my college in Knoxville. And while that whole thing came and went, I actually left college early. I went to work full time, and eventually I came around to job description for the marketing director at SFL and applied for it, and that's kind of how I ended up here. So it was a big 10-year gap, but 10 years ago, yeah, my introduction was through the International Students for Liberty Conference, which I think many other people will say is also their introduction to SFL.
Nice. Well, that's honestly a great segue into my next question, which is about the conference. So you mentioned how big it was even back in like 2013 time period. It's continued to grow, and you guys put on multiple a year. I'm curious if you know kind of like the origin story of that, like how they started putting those together and why the focus on the internationalness of it.
So, there's better people in the SFL world that have been around for longer that could probably give you the full story. But the origin story is kind of a piece of lore at SFL. Like it's something that we talk about. So they're often internally. So in 2008, our now board members and our founders, Alexander McCoba and Sloan Frost, Santa Ekman, they were students. They decided to put on a conference. It was actually around the time of Ron Paul's first political campaign, and they held a conference for this is their first internet, Students for Liberty conference in a blizzard. There's always these stories about having to like get stuff there in a blizzard and all the logistics behind it. And it turned out to be this huge event, like this event that a lot of people showed up to. And they didn't start Students for Liberty. Students for Liberty started with a conference. So they didn't go out saying, we're going to start this massive student group. They're like, we're going to put on this conference. And it turned out to be such a massive success in 2008 that it springboarded them into building this organization, which eventually became a global organization that had chapters and presence in every inhabited continent, which is what it is today. So it was, again, just like that first conference in 2008, it was such a massive success in spite of the fact that they were in blizzard conditions, that it just kind of, created the organization. Like that was the whole origin story.
That's awesome. So it's in the chicken or the egg thing. It was the convention came before the organization. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Like really that's cool. What made them realize they needed an organization. And that's what kind of birthed it was the conference. Yeah.
So I don't know exactly how much of your job description goes into putting together the conference, but I do want to talk a little bit about that and how you guys figure out where, when, how that kind of stuff is going on. And, I'll ask a couple more questions like that first, and then I'll go deeper.
Yeah, sure. We could start with that. So I'll give you the full context of kind of how I fit into the whole thing. So I'm as a global marketing director, I manage the LibertyCon International Conference. So there's one conference that we do every year in the United States, and it is basically the current day version of the International Students for Liberty Conference that we put on in the early 2010s, right? And so there are LibertyCons that happen in every continent, and we're about to have one in Europe, in Portugal in April. We just had one in November in Brazil. And we're going to have several more. I think we're going to have another one this fall. We have them usually before COVID in Africa. And we also had one in Latin America earlier or late last year. And so we do have them. We try to hold them in like every inhabited continent so that there's an opportunity for anyone around the world to kind of come and learn about these ideas and attend their own conference. But the one that I'm in charge of is not those satellite conferences. Those are awesome conferences run by our programs team. But my team, the marketing department, kind of helps manage, and we help manage the conference this year in 2020, or last year, I guess now, 2022. So that was actually the first conference we had done like that, the first LibertyCon since COVID. We had kind of like last year, we had what we call the Free Your Future Fest. It was like a kind of a more laid back outdoor conference that was a little bit less, it was a little bit different than what we've done in the past. But the first time we brought back LibertyCon since COVID was last year. Nice. And your question, I think, was about how we choose the venue. Was that?
Yeah.
Okay. So for us, there was a lot of market research that goes into it. So I mean, like we looked at a bunch of different markets that we thought would be interesting. We put like 6, 7 markets up there that we knew had low cost for travel, because I mean it's an international conference. So like a really big deal for us is making sure that people can fly there from other countries without having to like go do 2 or 3 hopping flights. I'm gonna hold it in Knoxville, so you got to fly to like DC and then Nashville and then Knoxville. Like we wanted to avoid that, so we looked at like major airline hubs. Obviously, another thing is we've got students coming to this, right? And so you're not going to expect that students are going to be like dropping money on expensive hotels. So we want to make sure we found a hotel that was like affordable, that, you know, anyone could kind of, it was kind of within the median price that's like, it's not going to break the bank. So really those are the 2 major things that kind of decided the market. Like, and that's the way we're looking at 2023 is, you know, can we find a place with affordable flights internationally? Can we find a place with hotel rooms that are not going to cost crazy amounts of money? And do we have a place that has a space for us? And if all 3 boxes are checked, then that's kind of like what makes it work.
Nice. I think you've got my wife interested in going to her first Liberty event ever when she found out that there was going to be a conference in Portugal in a few months. She's like, "Oh, I want to go to Portugal." When is this? I've never had her actually ask follow-up questions when I say, "Oh, there's a convention happening somewhere." But yeah, we might be able to get her to go to one now.
Yeah, LibertyCon Europe is huge. So it's going to be on April 22nd in Lisbon. And LibertyCon Europe is like, first LibertyCon Europe since COVID happened last year. And there were almost 900 people there. So it was almost 1,000 people. And it's one of the crazy experiences because I got to go last year. They had it in Prague in the Czech Republic. And it was just such an amazing experience to see the passion and energy behind our European programs team, like how much excitement and like motivation there is for the values in Europe. It is mind-blowing to me. In a lot of countries in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, I mean, these are countries that were behind, you know, behind the Iron Curtain, right? So these are countries where people that you are our age, like millennials, grew up with USSR influence as their childhood. I mean, they were growing up with this. Like, this was not something that they read about. This is something they lived. Their parents had direct stories of like what it was to suffer. So in Europe, the energy is just crazy. It's unmatched because they know the harms of socialism. They know the harms of big government in a way that I think Americans really can't truly understand. And that energy in the program seemed just like completely comes through in the conference. It was crazy to see. So if you can make it work, I'd say to do it. It's not that expensive to fly to Portugal. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's like not as expensive as flying to like Eastern Europe. You can do it for like under $1,000, I think. Last time I looked at the flights.
Yeah. We'll have to see how old the baby is, because currently the due date is 3 weeks before the convention.
Probably a good idea not to try that. Maybe wait for next year.
The worst case scenario would be if it comes late and she's like 9.5 months pregnant and trying to fly. That would be.
Have you tried to fly with a baby yet? Oh, I guess you've got the one that's 4 now, right? So
we drive everywhere. I have not tried to put him on a plane yet. Nope.
So I put I guess at that time was a 9-month-old baby on the plane to Miami to go to LibertyCon. And while we made it work, that was very stressful. So I would recommend against it, or at least take a short flight if you're going to do it for the first time. Yeah. Because it was only like 2 hours. And then that was baby. Flying with a baby is a whole nother experience. But that's a whole story.
That might be a weekend we tag in the grandparents.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. So next question about the convention is, how do you guys decide your speaker list and who fits the theme of the organization, and who, you know, because I know that there's always like the super liberty people, and then there are always some outliers that are like liberty friendly, liberty adjacent, and then I'm sure that there's other people in the consideration that get a final no vote that are like, no, they're not really part of what we want to do. So how does that decision making happen?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think first and foremost, we start with like our principles, like what are we trying to communicate? And this is the way we looked at it. Like, what are our really important things that as an organization and as our students really care about? Like, what are the ideas, the values that they really care about? And then we try to reach out to partners within our network, people that are directly related to those ideas that we've worked with in the past, people from like reputable think tanks, and, you know, the traditional run of the mill people. A lot of the types of people that you and I run into in the Libertarian Party are often there. For that reason, people like Justin Amash and Joe Jorgensen, Spike Cohen, like these standard people that we know in the movement that are really good on the principles and really good on the values that can kind of go there and articulate those things. And then people that are like related to think tanks that spend a lot of time thinking about this as well. And that's to also to include, economists and professors that we know are really good on the values, really good on the principles. Those are the first and foremost people that we reach out to and talk to. And a lot of the times that's an easy conversation because we've got years of experience working with these people. I mean, before I even got the job at SFL, these people were at SFL conferences. As I said, I met Justin Amash at a ISFLC LibertyCon conference in 2013. So this is good. He's been doing this for 10 years now, over 10 years. So that's the first thing. Now, when it comes to the more kind of controversial speakers, I like to bring in people. I mean, obviously one of the things we talked about is like, we want diversity of thought. So having a bunch of people that are going to echo libertarian ideas is worthless if they can't argue, go back and forth and have kind of like a good, tug and pull on the values and kind of like talk through some really challenging issues. Otherwise it's not really compelling content. No one wants to go there and listen to echo chamber. So one of the things that I try to do is like find people that, are operating in good faith. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Lambreth, but Brian Lambreth is our PR director, our PR manager at Students for Liberty. And he was also very involved with the planning process for LibertyCon.
Nice.
So I work with Brian closely and he's a good friend of mine.
He's a lot harder to get on a podcast episode. I said he's a lot harder to get on a podcast episode. I've been trying to get him on my show for like 2 years now since he started working with Spike. To just talk about that, and now he does like 7 other things that I would love to interview him about, and he just refuses to do podcasts.
Brian is not the kind of guy that goes on podcasts. He's very much like, he's the kind of guy that likes to do the work, but doesn't like to be on the spotlight. Like I'm very similar to that myself. I feel like when somebody offers me a podcast opportunity, I usually don't say no. I just always say yes, as a matter of principle. But yeah, so Brian's amazing. I'm sure that's clear to anybody that's worked with him. Like he's a really hard worker. He's a really great guy. Brian was really involved in helping us with the LibertyCon speaker procurement, and he and I work closely on that. But when it comes to controversial speakers, we want people that are operating in good faith. They may not have to fully understand or align with the values, but as long as they're operating in good faith and they're willing to have a conversation, that's really it. And then there's also an element too, David, of like, can we get you physically there? You could sort through hundreds of people and find out that I'm not sure if you've messed with this at all, but some of these people, man, especially these people that have big audiences, are charging crazy amounts of money to come speak, like crazy amounts of money. I give you an example. I reached out to Hassan Piker because I wanted to do a debate with him on capitalism versus socialism. Are you familiar with Hassan?
I am.
He asked us for $50,000 for one. The socialists was 50 grand to show up and talk about socialism. So
I feel like that would have just been the end of the debate. I would have almost paid him the money just to like be like, all right, well, you just lost. You already lost.
Yeah. Right. I thought that was peak irony. That made me laugh a lot. But yeah. So like, if you're willing to operate in good faith, have a conversation, then we're all about it. One of the things that I was really excited to see was Destiny showed up to debate Spike, and Destiny notoriously doesn't charge anything. He's free. We're not paying Destiny to show up there. He does it on his own volition. And that was, I think, a great conversation. They had a conversation about kind of where libertarianism where libertarianism breaks down. And they both had a really good faith conversation. They found middle ground, and our students loved it, and it got a lot of exposure online. So I thought it was a success. But yeah, I mean, it's really case to case. I think one of the things that I would try to do is avoid the echo chamber stuff, try to find diverse viewpoints. And as long as you're going to have a good faith conversation, then yeah, we're all about having you.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, I think I saw more clips of the Destiny debate than anything else post the convention this past year. Like I saw that all over the place on all of the social medias, even the ones that I've like intentionally not like let the algorithm know completely that I belong all the way in the libertarian echo chamber, and I follow like a lot of lefties and stuff like that. Like even Reddit, my Reddit was blowing up with that. With clips.
Were you able to watch the debate at all, or no? Or just all the clips?
I watched every clip that I passed, and then I tried to watch it, and I got like halfway through it and got distracted and never ended up going back and finishing it.
No, it's no worries. I think Spike said at the beginning that he had just like injured his back and he did the whole thing on painkillers. And in spite of that, he was amazing. Leave it to Spike; he can literally perform under any conditions. But yeah, I also saw a lot of that. There was a lot of hype online about that, and I think the year before we did a Vosh versus Warren Ray Bastiat. Are you familiar with Bastiat? The guy that streamed, like, we did that debate at Free Your Future Fest, and that was also kind of a really hyped up event. We try to do a lot of that stuff that's, you know, again, the goal is to reach the next generation, and they're on Twitch, they're on TikTok, they're not on, you know, we're the old people now, David. So
that's crazy.
Finding those people is where it's at.
Yeah. I like, you know, you still like to bring in at least a little bit of the kind of old media as well. I know Kennedy usually shows up to most of them, and a couple other, like, you know, Fox Business or similar. It's one of the things that I've always respected about the speaker lineup is that you do go all the way from like Fox News to Twitch streamer and everything in between.
Yeah, trying to have diversity there, I think, is the key. Like, you know, you can kind of like tell organization's political bent when you look at their lineup. And one of the things I try to do is like really throw so much diversity there that like we're representing a broad spectrum of like libertarian and classical liberal ideas. That was my hope with this whole thing, and I think we did a great job. I mean, we had, you know, like human rights activists as far as Ennis Cantor, John Mackey, you know, we had, as you said, we had all the old media people, we had Reason people. Hell, we had Joe Walsh there, which was an interesting conversation too. Yeah. And that's, you know, only a fraction of it, but like that, I think for me was my intention. And that's one of the things I talked to Brian about, was like making sure we had a diverse lineup and that we had a lot of ideological diversity was really important. And I think having young people exposed to that is really key. Because again, they're gonna smell BS from a mile away when they get in the conversation, and they're just hearing the same thing over and over again. That diversity is really important, and exposing them to different ideas is like the key to growth. So, yeah, I think we did a good job, and I'm gonna try to do a better job in 2023. So we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I think especially, you know, the point you're making with the younger people and the echo chamber, you know, you have to be very careful, because especially the people that you want there are the people who are instinctively going to question an echo chamber if they get put into one. Yeah. You know, if they're liberty oriented, kind of, you know, anti-authoritarian. You know, I went to YALCon 2020 and sat there. You know, there was a couple of the speakers where I was sitting there like arguing with them in my head, just because they were saying the same, like, fucking just the same shit over and over and over again. And, you know, Yal is a little bit like conservative, right-wing skewed, and so there's plenty of things there that I disagree with, as like a pot smoking, my best friends are almost all gay, like, you know, kind of a person. But, you know, if I just have to sit in an echo chamber like that, I will inevitably turn on my devil's advocate button and start arguing with you in my head. I used to do that as a Christian in church almost every Sunday.
I can absolutely relate to that. Yeah, especially that feeling like when you feel like you're in a place and it's like everything that you're hearing is the same thing over and over again. I've been in the same boat. The church example rings a bell to me. I'm a PK, so like I grew up in the church. I absolutely relate to that.
Oh yeah.
And that was the intention really here, was again combat that with a lot of diversity. One of the things that I'm going to lean into, like our team's really thinking about for 2023, is how can we bring more direct audience engagement with the speakers. So like one of the things that we got rid of a couple of years ago that I like really want to bring back is mics in the aisles. So like you know the experience you see this on social media all the time, like these conferences where they'll have like popular conservative right-wing speakers there, and you've got the young people going up and kind of asking questions and doing direct engagement. There's some really great content there. Not only that, but there's like really great learning opportunities. And like if you as a young person, an 18-year-old, can go up and ask a professor or ask like a major politician or a major thinker about this and like have that one-on-one conversation, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do more of in 2023. So like bring the diversity of thought and then give the students there and the attendees there the opportunity to kind of combat that. So say the things that they're thinking in their head directly to the speakers. That's like a huge value for us. That's something that we're going to implement in 2023 again and bring that back, because it's been a couple years. I think in like 2017 we brought it down to like doing it on digitally, like on Twitter, like you could tweet a question, right, and then we answer them. But I want to return to that like in-person thing, because I think there's just something to that you just can't get through like a digital means. Like really that
100%. I actually have a fun story on that topic. Freshman year of college, actually the first really big event after the start of the semester was the two authors of a book that I was supposed to read for my business class came to speak on that book and like a couple of other things. And they were economists that were like, you know, really, you know, right-wing free market economist people who now, like with me as rooted in the anarchist libertarian self that I am, would probably agree with a little bit more. But to the earlier point about the echo chamberness of it, you know, I went to a very conservative Christian college in Southwest Ohio. And, you know, everyone there is just a good patriotic Republican Christian, and like just all of it. And so I'm already at this moment, I'm still 17, so I haven't found the LP or anything like that at all. But it was basically just this is why America is the greatest speech. And, you know, based off of like GDP and a bunch of other things, and, you know, they had the data to back it up ish, but it was cherry picked data. And even as a 17-year-old, I was able to pick out that it was cherry-picked data. And, like, GDP isn't everything. Like, just because we have 7 people in this country that make more money than any other country in the world put together, that doesn't mean that our whole country is great. That's a terrible way to look at it. So they actually did the whole, like, Mike's in the aisle thing at the end. And I, as a freshman and probably the youngest person in the room, because I graduated high school a year early, got up and asked them, like, I don't even remember exactly. I picked apart their Russia sucks and their, like, Native American reservation suck points based off of, like, the U.S. federal government causes both of those things to happen. And I got at least a dozen people that came up to me after the event was over that was like, dude, that was so awesome that you had the balls to do that. Like, all the other questions were like, I love your book and you guys are great, and can you please just tell me like this? And I was the only person that like shot them down. And, you know, these two grown-ass men, and neither of them actually gave me a decent answer. They just kind of did the, you don't know what you're talking about, shut up. We did our math. And I got such a positive reaction from that I genuinely think that was a very pivotal moment to push me into doing shit like this and being the kind of person that will get up and question the assholes on stage because nobody else is going to. And the fact that it worked as well as it did and so many people like congratulated me afterwards was like a key moment that I will never forget. So I 100% think that is important.
It sounds like you and I had similar upbringings. I don't know, like for me, because I was growing up in the evangelical movement in very Christian spaces, and you know, I'm not really religious now. I have no animosity towards that whatsoever. Absolute love in my heart for like all the people that I grew up with. But one of the things that I think that I took out of it, because there was a lot of stuff that I believed, because I was like, I mean, I was raised on young earth creationism, like I was homeschooled from K through 12.
Same.
It's so many weird how many homeschoolers there are in the liberty movement. That's a whole other conversation. One of the things though it made me believe as an adult was that if your ideas can't stand up to scrutiny, they don't deserve to stand at all. Like you have to, like, if you challenge an idea, if your idea can't stand up to like real legitimate challenging, then it needs to collapse. Like it deserves to collapse. And the people that should raise red flags for you, and this is what it will teach my son, you know, when he gets old enough, is like, if they're unable to take questions and talk through these things with you, then that should raise red flags to you. Like, you know, what are you trying to hide behind, right? Like, why can't you have open conversation about this? Because again, I grew up seeing that, like, you just can't challenge that, you know, that's. part of the doctrine. That's part of the idea. That's what we believe. You just take it as it is. And I never was able to do that. So I think that's a really important value. And going back to what we're talking about with LibertyCon, like that's what we want to bring back is opportunities for young people to do that. If an idea can't stand up to scrutiny, then it shouldn't. It doesn't deserve to. And so given the opportunities to have those clash of ideas will be really fun. I'm actually pretty excited to see how it shakes out this year.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. I think the like all scripture is God breathed verse being used constantly to defend that scripture is legit, like taking scripture to defend scripture, like that whole logic circle was one of the first things that started to break me out of the like deep conservative religious and you mentioned young earth creationism. I left the faith and the church and still was a young earth creationist because being homeschooled through like Christian curriculums my entire life, evolution doesn't make sense to me. It never has. I don't know if it ever actually will. I'm no longer a young earth creationist, but I'm still not fully sold on that either because I've never had a legit science teacher explain it to me. And
well, see, that could be an entire episode in and of itself.
That would be kind of a fun one.
I think there's a thing to this because I was actually talking to Hannah Cox about this. Literally, like I think it was at LibertyCon, and she was homeschooled too. Like, or she was PK. I think she was homeschooled for a period of time. But like, it is really weird to me how many people in the liberty movement in North America, at least in the United States, either were homeschooled or were part of that evangelical movement, and then when they grew up, kind of joined the liberty movement. I don't know what there's got to be some science behind that because that's really interesting to me. I didn't know you were homeschooled.
I have to say that, I mean, there's the obvious part of like we weren't given a blatant like written by the government textbook our entire childhood. Definitely has something to do with it. And I also think that like liberty minded parents are more likely to homeschool. So like my parents
were pretty statist though.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, not like literally, like they were definitely like less statist than what you'd see, I guess in most people, but they were not like libertarian by any means. They're big George Bush supporters for crying out loud.
Yeah, so. I mean, same. You mentioned 2012, and I was sold on Mitt Romney in 2012 as a 13-year-old. So like, not you can't hold that too much against me.
See, I think the equivalent for me would have been like 2008. And in 2008, like I wasn't a huge John McCain fan, but I was like anti-Obama because that was what my parents were, like, so it is what it is. Now the question is, that was, you said 2012? So how are you in 2016? That's what mattered.
2016, I was the first election that I ever voted in. I was 19 and I was out of state the year before, so I didn't vote. I watched both primaries and I liked, I'm going to space on his name. He was one of the LP candidates this past time.
In the primary or
Lincoln Chafee. There we go. I liked Chafee in the Democratic side a little bit because he was the only one that was talking any kind of like anti-war, even a little bit of economic like sensibility at all. He was a very, very drastic counter to like a Bernie Sanders, and I already knew the track record of somebody like Hillary Clinton, so would never have supported her. And then I, watching the Republican side, I didn't like anything that I saw, really. I kind of liked Trump towards the beginning. He said a couple of things that I liked, but the thing that turned me off the most to Trump was the fact that I was still a conservative Christian and he was not, and he pretended to be. And I think he spoke...
But you've had quite the transformation in the last 6 years. Not to say that you're not conservative Christian or anything, but I know where you're at politically. That's a lot of change.
Yeah, I think he spoke at Liberty University and quoted 2 Corinthians and called it 2 Corinthians.
2 Corinthians, I remember that.
From there, I was like, definitely not. But, I liked the stuff that he had to say that most of the Liberty people will give him. He was, the drain the swamp stuff. Like his rhetoric in early 2015 was kind of liberty-minded. But then, I hated him, and it basically got down to like Trump, Cruz, Sanders, Clinton. I hated all 4. And it was to the point where I ruined like every dinner, just complaining about politics and all of this stuff. And my dad, in his brilliance, thought that showing me a better candidate might shut me up. So he was like, hey, I heard about this guy, Gary Johnson. You might be interested in him. And
your dad introduced you to Gary Johnson.
He did. He had like seen a video on Facebook or something like that. I don't honestly know where he found it, but
okay.
He thought that would make me stop talking about politics if I didn't have anything to complain about.
Turned out to be the opposite.
Oh yeah, he was so wrong. But you know, at the time, pretty much my only like solidly libertarian positions were guns and drugs, and Johnson was the only place that I could get both of those. I had never smoked before at the time, but I still realized that there's a difference between immoral and illegal. That's where I was at the time. Now, you know, I smoke every fucking day. But yeah, so 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson, and then mistakenly voted for Chuck Schumer over Alex in New York in the U.S. Senate debate.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's something that I will always regret. But I wasn't a member of the LP yet, so I didn't know Alex. I'd never met him, and I've met Chuck Schumer multiple times.
Have you really?
That's funny. As an upstater, having a statewide politician actually give a shit about upstate and come up here and having met him, and you know, he's done actually a decent amount of work for like central New York, western New York area. That in and of itself was enough to sell me on voting for his reelection. Was just like, he wasn't the typical New York politician that cared about Albany, Buffalo, and New York City, and that's it.
Sure.
So I voted for his reelection. Regret that shit so much. But that's the only vote that I have that I regret, because I was, you know, showed up to an LP meeting the January of 2017 and have been hardcore LP since.
Wow, it feels like yesterday, 2016 to me, at least. I don't know about you, but that really, like, it really doesn't feel like it's been, what is it, 7 years now or whatever? I mean, that's crazy to me that it's been even that long. But you could say, so you voted libertarian, then it sounds like every presidential election.
Yeah.
So you rejected the two-party system early on. That's great.
Hell yeah. It's really funny though, because if you had asked me at the time while I was casting the ballot for Gary Johnson, this is why I'm such a Big Ten open door policy, because I cast a vote for Gary Johnson, and if you had asked me at that time who my least favorite president was and why, I would have told you Harry S. Truman for firing General Douglas MacArthur and not letting him nuke North Korea and China during the Korean War.
Okay.
That was like, I was still a neocon, like nationalist, but I understood that I needed gun rights, and that like, just because it's immoral doesn't mean it should be illegal. And Gary Johnson was the only person that gave me both of those positions. And so that's why I'm always the advocate of, it doesn't really matter how libertarian they are. If they're going to show up, if they're going to vote for us, that's the best we can get for right now. And it's going to take a couple years. You know, I was still a closed borders person. I was still, you know, pro Roe v. Wade at the time. I was still like very, very anti-libertarian but I was the county chair at a time, because, or the county contact, because we didn't have an official party yet. So like, I'm always going to be a Big Ten advocate, because, you know, as long as you've got the general gist.
Yeah, you know, one of the things, kind of touch on that. So like, you know me, I mean, you probably see my stuff on Twitter, and you know, I've talked for years, but like, I'm definitely a Big Tent guy. I think that we need to have, like, the movement needs to be a Big Tent. Like, you need to have, not as we talked about, diversity of thought. You need to have like tolerance to other views internally, and you need to be nice to people, like, accept that. But one thing that I didn't really realize until I started working at Students for Liberty was just how much we take for granted I'm trying to think about a way to articulate this, just how much we take for granted the fact that libertarian leaning ideas are embedded in our culture in a way that even libertarians and people that are kind of like familiar with the idea don't fully recognize until you go to another country. Mm-hmm. Like, the United States is a rich libertarian tradition of, you know, like, ideological tradition that goes back a long time. Like, I mean, it's arguable that our founders were classical. I mean, they were classical liberals, like, but they were libertarians in the modern sense, right? So that is something that we take for granted in the United States. We don't really think about. When you go to other countries, that is not the case, especially in like Africa and Latin America and South America, a lot of places in Eastern Europe. And so Students for Liberty is like taking these ideas and bringing them to people that are like desperate for solutions. And it is so encouraging and exciting to like see like that, the kind of like light bulb moment that happens when these young people that have never been exposed to these ideas kind of like learn about it. It feels like for me, the first time I learned about libertarianism in 2012, like, and you can see this over and over again as an organization. That's what we do. We go around the world. We take these ideas and we bring them to the next generation. And we try to cultivate the next leaders of tomorrow that'll take these ideas and put them into their communities, whether they run for office or start a business or whatever. And like that is a really exciting place to be. So like, just to bring it back to SFL, because I know that's why we're here. I don't, talk about Libertarian Party or Libertarian candidates because we're aligned on that. But like that, when you think about first principles, is really important, because otherwise you're not going to get into any of these other things that we talk, like all these other political actions. You can't even do that in many countries if you don't have the basis, the foundation of ideas to work on for first and foremost.
I definitely agree that we take for granted the kind of libertarian undertones, because I think that's what helped me definitely go into it. Was when I first became a libertarian, like I said, as a kind of nationalist conservative, it was, these are the true Americans. This is the actual American party that, has the same ideals as our founding fathers. Like that was original me, was Libertarian Party is the only party protecting the Constitution.
Same here.
Now I'm a Lysander Spooner fan, and the Constitution shouldn't exist. But that
I haven't made that evolution yet, but I get it, because that's where I was too. It's very much like raised in the environment that was like really, like, learned a lot about early American history and like was really passionate about like protecting that and like the Constitution and the founders. Like that really, I mean, you're completely right. Like that was the values of the people that set up the country. Yeah. We could argue about the Constitution all day long, but like that in and of itself was what they wanted. They wanted a government that was there to protect the universal rights of everyone. And, that they did an amazing job, I think, of setting up a government that could do that better than any other government they had at the time. There might be better examples that have come up since then, but it certainly was a massive historic achievement at the time. That's for damn sure.
Yeah. Yeah. We mentioned parents a little bit earlier. My mom's an Army brat. My dad's an ex-Marine. They're fairly on the statist side, but my dad was also the government doesn't need to know how many guns I have. And if you tell anyone, I will hurt you.
Sure. It's a very American thing. I love it.
I very distinctively remember my sister trying to impress a guy when she was like 15, 16, and like telling this guy about my dad's guns and like that he has like so many guns and like that we grew up shooting them. And she was just like trying to seem cool to this like kind of redneck gun toting dude that she was trying to hit on. And my dad got so pissed of like, why are you telling people I have a lot of guns? That's nobody's business. And so like that kind of stuff definitely stuck with me and, helped usher me in towards, what we're talking about. So I think my dad definitely raised me to question a lot, even if you at the end have to accept it. Taxes are something you have to pay. Cops are people you have to listen to, but if you can avoid calling the cops, you should. And if you can avoid paying taxes, you should. Like, it's a very like kind of middle road. But I think to your point about kind of this whole next generation thing with SFL. Yeah. I wonder how much harder it's going to be, because a lot of that next generation is very, for lack of a better word, anti-American, even if they're on the right, because they think that the country has gone to shit because of the Democrats or vice versa. I wonder if it's going to be kind of challenging to have that same sales pitch.
Now, see, in the United States, that might be the case. I'm thinking globally, and like globally, I think that we have such a amazing future ahead of us. And like just to touch on that real quick, like when you go to other countries, like they're hungry for these values. They're hungry for these ideas. They're hungry for like prosperity and freedom. And so that is clear. right? So that's a whole nother thing. But if we're going to talk about the United States, I'm curious as to what you mean by the next generation is you said anti-American in a way. Is that, can you elaborate a little bit on what you kind of mean by that? Because I'm not sure I fully grasp where you're going with it.
I've seen a lot more of the sentiment. So especially on the left, they have kind of, been told for the last probably 7 to 10 years since like the rise of Bernie Sanders and that the United States is a racist, capitalist, evil country that and the more I talk to the more bottom of the political spectrum side of the left, they've gotten way more towards the just like abolish it, destroy it kind of side of things. Obviously those are the more engaged people closer to our age than maybe the next generation, but just like the kind of TikTok, Twitch genre of people, I've seen a lot more of that kind of just America is racist, even just that phrase by itself, a lot more. And then even some of my friends, like younger siblings who are growing up the same way I did, are being told that America's a socialist country and evil, and the Democrats are ruining it. And I think especially living through both Trump and Biden, as a teenager, I couldn't imagine it, of just
well, I mean, not even to mention the economic conditions. Imagine becoming 18 right now. Like you want to talk about the rise of populism and like misguided ideology. I mean, I would not understand. I wouldn't be able to thrive or survive if I would have been becoming 18 right now. I couldn't do what I did 10 years ago. Like that would have not been possible.
Yeah.
I mean, your points were received. I mean, there's like what is something like 20 million college students enrolled right now. And I think there's several million more that hit every year. I mean, there's still an entirely new generation that is still forming their ideas. I mean, like like from like 16 to like 20, you're forming your ideas and forming your values. It's on organizations like Students for Liberty and organizations like us to find those young people and reach them where they can be heard. So you talk about the really loud voices on the left that you find on like TikTok, we've got to go meet them there. Like that's what we're trying to do as an organization, is go out and find those young people and reach them on platforms that they care about. But I mean, it's a difficult challenge, but I think that's kind of why we exist, because like we exist for that reason, because there's an entire generation of young people, they're forming their values and their opinions. And I mean, in a real way, it's a really easy job for me as a marketer, because we are on the right side of the ideas. Like our ideas have been proven to work. Our ideas are right. And so it's not a tough sell. It's about exposing as much young people as you can to the values. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of conditions right now that I think make people a lot more like, that's the word, like apt to like leaning into bad ideology, because there's all this grievance politics, like populism is on the rise, and for good reason. I mean, I think that populism is misguided. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I think it was on an episode, a show the other day. And like we talked about populism. Populism, I think, is a reasonable response to a lot of the stuff that's going on. I think the issue is who populists are targeting. And they're targeting this shadowy elite group of people, when in reality, they should be targeting the government, the politicians that have made these decisions and sold out an entire generation and indebted an entire generation. And if we could bring back a populist movement against that, we would be moving in the right direction. I think that in a lot of ways is what SFL exists to do, is it existed to teach people the first principles and the values that underpin like really good, sound political and economic thought, and then have those young people go out into the world and kind of build these movements, build the companies, build the infrastructure that will fight against that in a variety of different ways, in ways that we can't even foresee right now. Because as you know, like I think like a lot of the times innovation and things that aren't even involved in politics can completely offset politics, right? They can completely like run around politics. And so like, that's the kind of stuff that as an organization we're thinking about, is how can we, find that the top young people, teach them the value, teach many people the values, find the leaders of those generation, give them the tools they need to go out into the world and make a change for liberty. whether that's in business or politics. And I think in the long run, like in generational timescales, I think we will be successful. But right now, it's really hard to measure that. There's a lot of noise for obvious reasons, but things are still shifting. And I tell you, globally, freedom is on the rise, man. Like it seems it's easy for us to get like frustrated in the United States, but if you really look at the global picture, like free trade will win. Like human liberty will win. I think we've just finished a decade of like watching authoritarian, like this really weird question about whether not even weird, but like this really concerning question about whether authoritarian governments are going to like offbeat these like liberal democracies and like these free democracies. And I think like COVID has proven that wrong. Like the economic conditions in the last 5 years have proven that wrong. And I think that the 2020s are going to prove that wrong in a really real way. I think so. I'm kind of optimistic in that sense. So I think that it'll be more clear, like when you and I get in our 40s and 50s, what the impact is. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of noise right now, man. And for good reason. Like, I mean, could you even imagine trying to like be like coming out of college right now? Are they, I don't even understand how these young people can afford rent. Like I look at rental prices. Like I could barely. I don't know
how I'm affording rent.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's what I'm saying. It's not even just that. Like I would have like I wouldn't just 3 years ago. Like this house that I live in now, I wouldn't be able to afford living here if I didn't buy this house 3-4 years ago. That's 3 years, man. I mean that's crazy to me. So
yeah, I asked myself that. Hypothetical question of like, what if you were 18 to 20. Fill in the blank quite often because I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Across the Universe. It's like based out of a bunch of Beatles songs, but it takes place in the Vietnam era. Like two different people within the movie go to Vietnam, and one of them is like a straight up Maoist, like communist anti-war activist. And watching that movie and hearing what he had to say in it, I'm like, if I was that age at that time, I don't know what would have stopped me from being one of the like almost violent level like anti-war activists of the day. Like I probably would have come out full-blown communist, like regardless of my upbringing, because that message resounded with me even as a libertarian, knowing he's full of shit. It still resounded enough that I was like, if I didn't know what I know now, there's no way I wouldn't have been 100% on his side. And we're also talking a long time ago in a way that there wasn't quite as definitive of a communism doesn't work like we know now. There was a little bit of BS there, but we hadn't watched every communist country fall one by one like we have now. So yeah, I don't know what people are going to go through now.
That speaks to exactly the problem that we have to solve, and that's I think the role of like student groups like Students for Liberty and other groups is like, you had a problem. You mentioned this. You were you're anti-war, just like I am. And you like watching the violence of the Vietnam War and watching like the absolute immoral, like just this play out on a national scale would cause you to be like brought to an ideology that may not fully align with, just because you saw a component of that ideology that addressed the problem that you had. And so I think that's the key, is finding a way to articulate to the next generation why this like classical liberal ideology addresses these things that they're passionate about, because the next generation is passionate about like being anti-war. They're passionate about like ending police brutality. They're passionate about like upward mobility. They're passionate about human freedom, and they articulate it in different ways than you might expect than other generations do. But they do care about these things, and in a lot of ways, this is why they're drawn to socialist ideology, like because they speak their language. And so really the key is like just again. A lot like I was again having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I think a lot of young people that say they're democratic socialists say that because they hear democratic socialists as parroting things or saying things that they personally believe inside. And there are things like, everyone should be able to make a living wage, right? Like the government shouldn't be acting like being an imperialist power. Like you should be free to put in your body whatever you want to put in your body, right? Like the police should not be able to like come in and kill you if you break the law. Like these are things that Democratic Socialists are saying that young people care a lot about. But when you look at the economic, like the macroeconomic picture that Democratic Socialists are offering, it's too abstract for young people to really understand how to like break it down, right? And how to like piece it apart. So we have to speak their language and talk to them and show them why this ideology addresses their challenges in a different way. And that entails, again, speaking their language and coming to them where they are, not like expecting them to find us. So, but again, I don't think many Democratic Socialists, like young people, actually will be. And I think there's this whole meme about how like young people get old and they buy their first house or they buy their first car and they get their first assets and then they convert. I think that's because that like macroeconomic, that's really the most problematic thing about Democratic Socialists. Like you and I could talk about their war stance or their social policy stance, and a lot of the things you and I would agree on. It's really those economic things that we disagree on, and those are also the hardest things to really understand as a young person. So that's the key for us, is giving them the foundation to understand those things, be able to like fight against those things on their campuses, and introduce them to what I believe is like the silver bullet ideology that really gives them like the tools they need to go out into the world and like empower themselves and empower others. So again, I'm optimistic because I do think it's possible, and I see it play out in other countries around the world, like in a way that I didn't see until I joined SFL, and it's really encouraging to see that. I think the United States is in a weird position, but we're also seeing great growth in the United States too. So it's not to say that, I just think that there's a lot of noise that we got to take a step back and really look at the macro picture. And if you really do look at that, I think we actually are moving in the right direction, dude. I mean, even the COVID thing, like 2 years ago, I think when you and I met last year, I mean, this was like right at the tail end of COVID. I think a lot of people have woken up to how screwed up that response was. I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole now, but like that was an example, in my opinion, of like a really authoritarian impulse that we saw play out. I think that overall, like the vast majority of Americans realized that was not the appropriate way to handle that, even young people, and they're changing their mindset because they were negatively impacted. That's just a small piece, though.
I'm going on rabbit trails every time that the government lies, gets caught in their lie, and then gets blamed for death because of their lie, we win a lot of people over. I think the war in the Middle East was a huge thing. Similarly, where we are 100% sure that there were no weapons of mass destruction anywhere in the Middle East when we went in. But if anyone within these borders of these 50 states even hinted at that, you were a Taliban-loving, just like anti-American, horrible person. And, back then I agreed with that, right? But once I was told like that was bullshit, we were completely lied into that. That was a huge movement for me. And I think, to your point, COVID is very, very similar. We're seeing, we lied to you and people died because of it, but you should still trust us next time.
Right. No. And there's obvious skepticism, and there should be. Skepticism is good. Every time a new generation sees this play out, it's going to increase their skepticism, and that's for good reason. So, yeah, I mean, again, I remember that as a kid too. Like you said anything to step, to like speak out against the war in Iraq, and you were really demonized. That was actually one of the reasons why in 2012 I was so passionate about Ron Paul, and was that because he was like one of the only major politicians I saw that were like willing to like unabashedly say truth, speak truth, and educate people. And that's the thing, man. It's like these first principles, they're timeless. You don't need, like, if you could say the same thing now, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, 80 years ago, the communities are going to change, the response is going to change, but those values don't change, and those values still work. And people that are willing to do that, I have a lot of respect for them, obviously. I mean, sure, we both do. But an organization that's willing to take those values and share them is really, really important. Did you ever see that? I'm sure you've probably seen this, but the whole thing with Ron Paul and Morton Downey Jr. in like the 80s talking about, did you ever see that clip with him? He went on a, I can't believe you haven't seen this, because this is like a thing. This is like a thing in the movement now, but like, I mean, I've heard a million people talk about this, but I saw this video years ago. Ron Paul went on Morton Downey Jr. in like 1980s. And it was like about drugs, and he was talking about how the drug war doesn't work. And he was literally like spit on and yelled at and like completely attacked for saying things that now are considered common sense.
Yeah.
All these things that he said were rooted in like these like classical liberal principles that are timeless.
I don't think I've seen the clip you're referencing, but I have
you should watch it.
I've seen the clip where he got a standing ovation from a Republican crowd in South Carolina for saying we should legalize heroin.
I think that was 2008. I remember that clip too because that was a big moment. Like, yeah, I remember that. But you should watch that. He went on a basically like a Jerry Springer type show in the 1980s, and this was during like the peak of the DARE, don't do drugs thing, right?
Yeah.
The drug war. And he went out and said, this drug war isn't working. Like, this is not a way we're going to fix the problem. This causes more issues. He basically said all the stuff that we consider common sense now. And he was spit on and like literally like yelled at, cursed at on live TV. It was very Jerry Springer-esque. It was like a proto Jerry Springer at the time. I think Jerry Springer was actually on TV at the time. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But long story short, you should check it out. Like, look up Ron Paul Morton Downey Jr. You get a kick out of it. I know of all people, you'd get a kick out of it.
I definitely will have to do that. I do want to backtrack to something you said a couple points ago about kind of meeting them where they are and speaking their language of the kind of young left. Because when I ran for New York City Council in 2019, I was 22, and the Libertarian Party in New York City is not some great gigantic thing like it is in some other places in the country, and so I didn't campaign to libertarians. I campaigned to the left pretty much the entire time. I marched with BLM and no new jails. I saw Greta Thunberg speak at the climate strike in New York City, like the biggest event that they did during that whole thing where, all the kids were skipping school every Friday and marching and all that thing. And I actually got a large amount of support out of like the No New Jails movement and like the Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion and these like blatantly communist organizations, like call themselves communist organizations, were okay with me as a libertarian because I had policies that they agreed with. Like you're saying, like I was echoing the stuff that they actually cared about. I was willing to march with them and stand on the steps of City Hall cursing out city council members for trying to build 4 brand new jails in New York City. And then maybe they might tear down Rikers Island in 20 years after those 4 are built. That's the bill they passed. And it was like a something $1 trillion bill. And, no libertarian should agree with that. Like, that's just completely bogus to us. And I was able to say that in a way that they understood. And, another one of my major platform pieces was environmentally based. I said that I don't believe in regulating anything like that for the common people, but the government should be setting an example in this way. So I had a policy of, solar panels on every building that the city owned and every city vehicle being an electric car within 10 years. And, that would force infrastructure to be built for like charging stations and all of this other stuff. And because I think I looked it up at the time and it was it was in the high 20% of cars on the street in New York City were owned by the city. And then another like 20 something were from the state. So like there's a lot of cars that would have to be electric. It would end up being a gigantic market share if that bill would have passed. And, they were like, we wish you would do more, but we accept that this is a good starting place and your opponent doesn't give a shit at all. She's like endorsed by the police union and like a couple of other like really awful career politicians. So they had discounted her already and were willing to listen to what I had to say. And I echoed what they cared about back to them in a way that I cared about it. Because, I don't want the earth to burn up anytime soon. I don't want us to run out of natural gas to where we can't heat our homes. Like, I don't believe in the whole like climate anxiety thing necessarily, but there's still some truth to it. And, we should try to curb that if we can.
Absolutely. It's interesting you bring that up because we're in the process at Students for Liberty. Actually, this April, we're launching an entirely new program that we're calling Green Liberty, which is focused on bringing libertarian, classical liberal solutions to address the climate crisis and the climate issue. And I think that that's like, it's super exciting for me because I don't know. Again, a lot of people, it's controversial in the liberty movement when you bring up climate change or anything like that. But I think that truly that classical liberalism, libertarianism has the solutions to the climate crisis, climate change, whatever you want to call it, or, environmentalism. And because, I mean, again, we spend $6 trillion a year subsidizing, governments around the world spend $6 trillion a year subsidizing fossil fuels. Like zoning laws themselves are the reason why we cannot increase density. Like single family zoning is really bad for the environment. Like, these rural houses, like the suburban lifestyle is very bad for the environment. And then when you think about it too, like the government is basically making decisions because of lobbying, that's incentivizing legacy systems like natural gas and coal and all that. And they're really not thinking about innovative and new approaches because they've got these legacy players that are like paying their bills, right? Like, and so I think that if you actually embrace classical liberal ideas, it would solve the climate crisis in a way that government centralized control would have no chance. So we're actually launching a global initiative in April to educate the world on, through our students, educate the world on these values, talk about this. We've got an entire summit that we're going to put on that's about trying to find free market solutions to climate change, because as an organization, we believe that the free market will solve the climate problem, for real. And I think most libertarian leaning people agree with me on that.
Yeah.
And this goes back to what we talked about, reach people where they are. Like, young people care about climate change. Young people care about the environment. Our ideas win, man. Our ideas fix these problems for these people, for the next generation. Why aren't we talking about this? That's why we exist. So let's cut you off. Sorry.
No, you're good. And I think, you mentioned that it's kind of a controversial topic for a lot of liberty-oriented people. I think that needs to go away. Whether you believe in climate change or not, you have to understand that the person you're talking to does. And you are not going to convince them climate change isn't real. That's a harder sell than convincing a Bernie Sanders voter that libertarianism is the answer. That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to change their mind about climate change. You're trying to change their mind on economics and big government policy. And, you can play devil's advocate in your own mind for a second and just pretend you believe climate change is real. And just talk to them
absolutely
as
it
is.
Address what their problem is. Don't talk past them. Talk to them about their issue. I mean, their issue is they want to see less CO2 and less greenhouse gases. Again, wherever you stand, but at least where I stand, the moment that really changed my mind on this, and it's not political at all. It's I think it's grounded in science. Not, I think it absolutely is grounded in science. If you look at 10,000 years of ice core measurements of CO2 in the atmosphere, you go back, it was relatively stable from 10,000 years to today. And then you look at the last 100 years and it's a hockey stick. You can absolutely say, now, whether that's going to contribute to tsunamis and the end of the world is a whole other thing. But it's legitimately proven that we've doubled CO2 in the atmosphere in the last 10,000 years, and just in the last 50 years, it's been a doubling for 10,000 years of stability. So that for me was the moment where I was like, okay, something's got to change. You can't double the CO2 in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases, and expect things not to warm up, whether it's Al Gore levels of the world is ending, or whether it's just okay, things are going to get a lot hotter and it's going to be, cause agricultural issues, or sea levels are going to rise and people are going to have to move. Whether it's smaller or huge is a completely different story, but addressing people and the values they care about is really important. And I mean, at least for me, whether again, it's not even that controversial, CO2 is absolutely going up like crazy. And I think we should think about that as a society, how we can make sure that does not continue to skyrocket like a hockey stick, because there's no way that will end well if it continues for the next 50, 100 years. It'd be dangerous.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And it is really sad that there are probably people that were watching this show, like super interested, are now like, oh, what are these guys talking about? Because like,
you can find us in the comments. It's good.
Yeah. But I definitely believe that the speaking to people where they are mentality is something that, I actually credit a lot of my upbringing with that, like, Christian conservative side of, like, evangelicalism. That's the word. That shouldn't have been as much
evangelicalism.
Because you're taught to, meet people where they are, and, love the sinner, hate the sin kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And it definitely, I think I started off kind of already in a mindset of, how to talk to people who disagree with you without pissing them off and making them kind of understand. Like, I grew up going to, I was fairly in the echo chamber, but the main thing that brought me out of it was Boy Scouts. I was one of like 2 Christians in Boy Scouts. So like I was our troop chaplain, and I had to say prayer at like every meal for the entire like 9 years I was in Boy Scouts, because I was like the only person that even believed in God to pray to him. And so I got a lot of challenge there that I wouldn't have gotten if I wasn't a Boy Scout, like, at all in my life. And my goal was not to make these other kids in my troop Christians necessarily. It was just to make them stop picking on me more than anything else. And so it turned into not a like argument, but more of a just kind of like make them question themselves so they shut up. And make them question why they dislike me and what preconceived notions they have of me. And honestly, playing that little bit of devil's advocate, I think probably started to break me out of that echo chamber by itself, because I was starting to, like, I would agree with them on something that I might not have totally agreed with them on, just to throw them off. And they were like, wait, so you believe that maybe maybe New Earth creationism isn't true, but you're still a Christian. Like, how does that work? And there are plenty of evolutionist Christians, and so I know how to argue that point. And so I think that kind of upbringing and the, like, you don't save people, God does in his time, kind of mindset enabled me to be like, yeah, I don't need you to be an anarchist today. I just need you to stop telling me that anarchism is stupid, because it's not.
Yeah, no, I love the sinner hate the sin is an interesting thing that you said, because I think that also has a lot of allegories to, like, again, talking about any sort of like bigger picture, like philosophy or ideology like this. Because again, if you can just understand people are where they're at, talk to them in their own language, like, that has a huge impact. I feel like a lot of people in the liberty movement, at least the people that I've been interacting with directly through my years in the LP, can sometimes have a challenge with that, because they spend a lot of time thinking about these ideas, and they expect a lot of other people to be where they're at, and they don't realize that a lot of people just don't think in this paradigm, especially in the United States. And it's really important to, like, talk to them in their own language.
Yeah. I had a fairly interesting experience, and it was kind of fun to talk it out with my wife afterwards, because I got into an argument on Twitter the other day. I won't name names because I don't normally try to shit talk people on my show, but I got into an argument on Twitter the other day about the war in Ukraine, and probably like 4 or 5 people interacted with me in that thread, and all of them ended up blocking me but one.
Oh no.
And one of those people is somebody that, I know we disagree on plenty of things. He thinks I'm a little too aligned with the Mises Caucus on some stuff, and thinks that, and he's one of those, like, everyone that's ever even considered that caucus as legitimate is obviously a terrible human kind of person. And, like, I know all of these things about him and have remained cordial, and almost hired him to work for my company, and was still planning on it. In a couple, like we needed to have another conversation, but was going to hire the guy, knowing that we had all of these disagreements, like a number of them. But one interaction that was negative, where I posed a disagreement loudly, and I got blocked and just completely written off. And it's just a super telling kind of trend within the movement of, you know, there are those some people. I think you're also an extremely good example of this, of someone who, you know, might not agree with everybody, but will work with them all, and, you know, remain cordial and kind to in a way that most people in the movement do not. And
I have like, I try like as a rule of thumb on Twitter, because I spend time arguing with people on Twitter too, just like you do. I don't have anyone. The only thing I'll block you for is if you threaten me with violence or threaten my family with violence. That's about it.
Yeah.
Not to cut you off, but yeah, absolutely.
But I definitely think that there is an element that I see that is more common with the people who are doing the work that someone like you is doing. Or like, you know, say Spike Cohen, or, you know, some of these other people who can't act like that, or else their entire lives and brands and everything will collapse. Like, you couldn't put together LibertyCon if you blocked people for just being in a caucus that you disagreed with. Like, it just wouldn't fucking work.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Diversity is important. And also, again, how does that help people come to your side if you're like cutting them out and absolutely blocking, like silencing them, or like trying not, again, I don't know. I think that if you're having a debate in open public field arena, all things, you know, like I don't know, you know, the work that Justin's done and that we've done with For All Tennessee, and like the work that we've done in the LP, the work that I've done with Just for Liberty. I want to try to be respectful. I want to try to like bring people together. The goal is not to like own people or, you know, like piss people off. The goal is like liberty. And you're not going to achieve that by making a bunch of enemies. Spike Cohen actually does know this very well. Like, Spike has the opportunity often to get into fights that he shouldn't get into, and he is always above the fray. He does a really great job of that. Like, I think he's a good example of that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and, you know, he talks about it a lot also with just as a concept of, you know, why would I spend my time arguing with libertarians when I can make government accounts get deleted?
Yeah, no, like that absolutely is the right way to look at it. I mean, if you're looking at it from the LP's perspective, you're spending a lot of time fighting other people in the party. What value does that bring? Like, how does that move the needle towards liberty to the general public? Like, you should be talking to the general public, because we are a small minority in the LP. But, you know, and that's the same case for any sort of like nonpartisan or you know, like group like SFL. You need to reach young people, as we talked about many times, reach young people where they are, reach as many of them as you can. Don't try to, you know, just like seek out the libertarian leaning people already. Try to like find as many people as you can, expose them to the ideology. That's how you change hearts and minds. That's how you change societies in generational timescales. You just gotta have to wait for it to play out.
So I have one off-topic question by request of my wife, because she doesn't think my show is interesting enough, and so I have to add in some fun questions. What is the strangest thing in your refrigerator right now?
That's a great question. The strangest thing in my refrigerator. That is definitely off top. My wife actually just completely was like bragging to me because she completely threw out like all of our like leftovers today.
Nice.
And she was like, "Oh, the refrigerator's." I don't know, like a half-eaten summer sausage from Aldi, maybe. I mean, like I don't, I don't have anything that's like really weird. We drank. What about you? Like, what? So have you? Do you ask?
I don't know. She gave me that question. I think I might keep doing this though.
Yes, you should. I'm curious
by her request. Because she one of the things that was cute when I first met her and started to annoy me very quickly was how many of these questions exist in her head. Like, we had like the first road trip we took together, we were probably like 2, maybe 3 hours in, and she just starts bombarding me with like, would you rather have webbed feet or webbed hands? And I'm like, what?
That's really funny. Well, you know, it's interesting. If you would have asked me like 3 months ago, I did have like a bunch of like frozen mud in my freezer at one point, because I have that would have been my answer. But I got rid of it literally like 2 weeks ago. Like, I had to throw it all out.
Okay, you've got to explain that one.
I had frozen mud because I have I guess your audience can't see it, but I have like planted tanks. So like I have these fish tanks that are like all like live plants. So there's substrate, like dirt and stuff at the bottom of them, and I'll build these tanks out. And I have like 3. I've got 2 downstairs. I used to have a bunch more than that, but I got rid of them because they're just too much. And what you want to do, like when the tanks get older, is you want to try to find a way to like add like newer mud and dirt in the bottom to like, you know, give nutrients to the plants. So I'd like freeze mud chunks like in an ice tray and like put the mud underneath the dirt to try to like give the nutrients to the plants. And so that it didn't like, you know how when you put mud and water, it like makes it all brown. So basically you could avoid doing that because the fish will basically die of stress if you dirty the water. So that's the weird story, really boring reason as to why that's the case. But I wish I would have had it still in my freezer, because then I could have had a great anecdote for your show. It could have been the great one to kick it off.
There you go.
Because no one's going to be mud in their freezer, right? So.
No, I don't think so. No. So to bring it back to LibertyCon now.
Sure.
I want to ask what benefit you have seen from just getting all the people together under one roof for the weekend.
I like the thing for me was, beside the fact that there was like a lot of ideas, you know, diverse ideas there, it's just a really energizing experience to be able to be there with all these different people from the movement, to be able to like get excited about the ideas. And like, really the coolest thing for me was, I mean, like one of your sponsors, I think Blood of Tyrants was one of our sponsors there. Dan Berman was one of like 50 different sponsors that we had. But there's just all these diverse like different organizations there that are all working on different niche issues. There's a really awesome slew of breakout sessions that do trainings for young people about how to like, you know, bring liberty to their campus or like fight for different reforms in different ways. There's a lot of just really rich educational content there. And then it's just, for me at least, and this is again the reason why I joined SFL to begin with, was just it's super energizing to get into a room with people that are coming from Africa and Asia and Europe, and like see that there's like this international community of people that think like you. It really can take you and just make it, again, for me, it was a light bulb moment as a young person. And I get excited being able to bring that to people today as almost, you know, a 30-year-old, like being able to show like these, you're not alone, right? A lot of people in the liberty movement feel like they're the only one on campus, or they're, you know, the only one, there's only like a dozen of them in their states. People in the LP can relate to that, I'm sure, a lot. Like you show up to a meeting and there's like 5 other people there.
Yeah.
Hell, if there's 5, that's probably a good meeting. You know? Maybe even 1. So that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited, is being able to be in a room with a bunch of other people that share the values, seeing that there's an international community backing you up, learning about the ideas in ways that you can go take it back to your community and do things that really have impact. And then meeting like all of our amazing sponsors. Like that was really cool to see, just again, really diverse group of people there, from a lot of different backgrounds with a lot of different passions. So if you can make it, I will get you free tickets. I'll get your audience free tickets in 2023.
All right.
I'll give you a Fite code, Fight for Liberty. Absolutely. Just got to shoot me a message. We'll make it happen.
It sounds like a plan. Yeah, I know we did a lot of shit talking on the concept of an echo chamber earlier on in the show, but there is some benefit to, when you're almost never in that echo chamber, getting to just like hide in it for a minute and actually hear your ideas bounced back at you in a way that you're not really used to is really just reassuring. I remember, you know, to your point about how small the LP can be, you know, I joined the LP thinking that I was an outlier, you know, watching Gary Johnson lose the 2016 election very handedly. And, you know, I'm going to meetings. There's like maybe 20, 30 libertarians that I know of in central New York. I moved to New York City, and then it turns into like 7 or 10. And then I go to like YALCon or even a state convention or something like that, where it's just a weekend of everyone I bump into. You know, back to the topic of like meeting people where they are. I don't have to. I can meet them where I am, and have an actual conversation about what I believe, and kind of you know, maybe find out I'm wrong on some of it, and you know, actually have more nitty-gritty conversations. I love getting to go to those kinds of things, and I'm sad I missed a a lot of them last year because life was just crazy. But the schedule this year looks like I should be able to show up to a couple more. I don't know how having a child at the beginning of the year makes this year less crazy. I think I'm just being naive. But I really just miss that kind of connection, and luckily we can kind of do it on the internet to a point, but it's just not the same as getting to smoke a joint with Scott Horton and listen to him rant about how terrible John McCain is. It's just great.
There is definitely something to the in-person experience, and hopefully with at least SFL's conferences this year, we'll be able to put together an experience where you can have those like really good moments where you're talking to people that are really aligned with you, and then also get the opportunity to like challenge people or talk to people that are also on the other side, or people that are on the same side but just a little bit on the left or the right that you might disagree with. Yeah. That's the fun part for me, because we all, even within the movement, have our own kind of space that we occupy, and there's a really big diversity of thought, and there's nothing wrong. Like, there's a lot of value in being able to challenge opinions from different sides. Again, like iron sharpens iron, right? So we're all kind of improving ourselves as we go.
Got to throw one more Bible verse in there towards the
end. Yeah. Is that a Bible verse? You know, it's like so deeply ingrained in my mind that I couldn't even tell you where that's from. It's probably from my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of just, and you know, I think you kind of answered my last question before I asked really a question at all in the show, of the fact that this convention is what brought you to the organization and rooted you in the movement. You know, it's very difficult to evangelize to people as a loner. You know, the easiest way to get somebody to hear your point of view was to invite them to like the lock-in or the youth retreat or whatever. You know, that same mentality still exists with this. Is, you know, if I have somebody that's kind of almost libertarian and I can get them to come to our even county convention and hear, or like state convention and hear Spike and Scott Horton speak, they're going to do so much better of a job than I ever could at explaining some of these things. And they make my job a lot easier at converting these people into libertarians. So I think we need to utilize that a lot more, and, you know, let the heavy hitters do your job for you. Just bring people to these conventions that are, you know, have an open mind, and like you said earlier, are you know, kind of operating in good faith. And let the main speakers and the breakout sessions and the random conversations over the meals do your work for you.
Absolutely. And if there's anybody that you feel like you might disagree with, give people the opportunity to challenge it and then hear a response back. That's huge, because again, you could go to I remember going to like a youth convention as like a young person in the evangelical church and be like, oh, I don't agree with this, but if I can't challenge it, then I'm never going to have my opinions addressed, and I might leave feeling actually more ingrained in my opinion. But if I can go up there and be like, oh, you know, I think I disagree with you with this, and then hear a compelling response back, that's huge. It really, it helps everyone grow. It's a really valuable thing. So that's what we're trying to provide this year, and we'll see how it shakes out. I actually think our next conference is likely going to be in early 2024, like this time 2024, but that's not set in stone yet. We're actually going to have that set in stone within the next 60 days. So hopefully the next time we talk, I'll be able to bring something to your audience and let everyone know where it's going to be, what we're doing. So it'll be fun.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how to find SFL, get more information about it, join up and do things, as well as you know, how to find you and get in touch with you.
So SFL, you could find us on Twitter at SF Liberty, pretty much every other platform at SF Liberty. You could look up studentsforliberty.org, and then our social media is Students for Liberty, SF Liberty on TikTok, and then Students for Liberty on Facebook. I think the best way to get involved is if you're a young person and you are interested in joining the local coordinator program, or becoming getting the tools that we provide you to really make a difference and grow your skills. You can check out that on our website, studentsforliberty.org. Just go to the programs tab, and you can apply for the LC program. And then the next LibertyCon, you can check out, get on the mailing list for LibertyCon 2023 at libertycon.com. And just sign up there. We'll give you a notification when we've got the date locked in for this year. And then you could find me at Josh Eakle on Twitter, Eakle. And I think that's it. I think that's most of it.
And I'll also give you a second to shout out For All and
yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So Justin is taking the reins actually because of a lot of my obligations. I've had to step aside from like direct involvement. So I'm kind of more of an advocate at this point, just mainly due to my time constraints. Just for clarity, but Justin, who was on David's show back in, I think it was around the summer of last year, talked about Organization For All, which is a nonprofit dedicated to like empowering, correcting the imbalance between people and their government, empowering people. Like basically their whole goal is to bring policy that empowers people and limits government. You could find them on Twitter at foralltn.org or foralltn, and then their website is foralltn.org. And their founder or their co-founder with me, Justin Cornett, you can look up his episode on David Fite's channel, Fight for Liberty, Cornett, I think is how you spell his last name. And I think he does a great pitch on your show. So
yeah, that was by far one of my favorite episodes. And
Justin's a great guy to talk to. He's just fun to hang out with. So we got to hang like at the next LibertyCon or the next convention, whatever we can make work. We got to hang. He's a great guy.
Yeah,
it's fun to hang out and drink a beer with for sure.
Yet to meet either of you in person, so that needs to be rectified for sure.
Either we do it at LibertyCon or we'll do it at the 2024 LP convention. We'll figure it out. Will you be at the 2024 LP convention?
Probably, hopefully. Okay. I don't know. I didn't make it to Reno. I
didn't either, and that was the first LP convention I missed in years, mainly because I just had a baby. So
that's a fair reason.
You're about to find out how it is. But sorry,
I was heading up Larry Sharp's petitioning team in New York City.
That's a really good reason to miss it.
Yeah, it's funny because I took over for my good friend who was running it up until basically a couple of days before Reno, and I came in and took it over and just finished out that last week and a half so he could go to Reno, and I chose not to. I was like, no, I think I'd rather just stay here and do your job instead and make money instead of spending it.
No better way to make money than helping out Larry Sharp, man. That guy is he's the GOAT in New York, at least. I love that guy. So.
Yeah. But hopefully we'll finally make it. I've actually never been to a national convention. So 2024, fingers crossed. It'll be an interesting one to be my first, that's for sure.
Yeah, no joke. That'll be something else. We should have a whole nother episode to just talk about that. So maybe we can make that work, because there's a lot of work that we're doing in the LP right now that I think you'd be interested to hear about as well. So not SFL, but me and the Classical Liberal Caucus and some of the people involved in that. That's a whole separate thing that has nothing to do with SFL whatsoever. But
I was unaware you were part of involved with the Classical Liberal Caucus.
Yeah, I'm on the board.
Nice.
And I'm on the board since the day that they were founded. I am very good friends with the founder. Actually he and I had a conversation about doing it 6 months before we even launched it. So that's something we can talk about in another episode.
Yeah, I'll definitely be interested to hear that. Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome, as always.
Yeah, man. It was great. Had a great time.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Gentlemen and ladies who have been in the audience, thank you so much for watching. We will be back here next week with the great Harrison Kemp talking about his gubernatorial run in Maine and what the LP Maine is working on. But until then, keep up the fight.